ちが命久しぶりだなサスケ Mr. Donnie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tiffany. A lot of you can probably brag about your iPhones, cool sneakers, or thousands of TikTok subscribers. I don't have any of that. But what I do have is a polar bear. Are you surprised? Honestly, it's not surprising at all because I live in the tundra. Here, polar bears aren't a luxury. They're a means of transportation. My ancestors have been living in the tundra since ancient times, and I'm no exception. My parents and I live in a chum. This is our cone-shaped dwelling. If you've never seen a building like this, I suggest you go on a trip and maybe even spend the night in one. Life in the tundra is difficult and exhausting, but at the same time, it's also pretty interesting. The life of every adult and child is scheduled down to the minute of every day. We can't avoid our responsibilities because our lives depend on them. If you get sick or you're too lazy, then you can die from the extreme conditions, so it's better not to risk it. We often have to move from place to place because of our deer. They eat up all the vegetation wherever we stop pretty quickly, and then we have to move on. Our family has a fairly large and profitable reindeer farm, so we have an elite apartment in one of the cities where my older sister Berta lives with our grandmother. Before, Berta lived with us in the tundra, but then she entered university and decided to become a city dweller because animal husbandry and the steppes didn't appeal to her. There's enough room in her apartment for all of us, but I would never give up my cold freedom for urban comfort, especially since then I would have to part with my best friend Bob. By the way, it's about time I introduced you. This is Bob. Yes, that's right, he's a real polar bear. But he's not the least bit mean or scary, at least not with me. We actually grew up together. On my 3rd birthday, my dad gave me a snow-white puppy named Bob, and we became friends very quickly. However, later it turned out that it wasn't a puppy at all, but a polar bear cub. My parents decided that they had to let him go, but I couldn't let them take my only friend, and after a lot of convincing, I was allowed to keep him. He grew a lot faster than I did. After a year, he looked like a real adult bear. My parents quickly got used to our friendship and let me go out on my own with Bob. Nobody with a polar bear next to them needed to be afraid of any other animals. Soon it was time to go to school. It's not so easy to get an education in the tundra, so I was sent to a boarding school. I was against the idea, but my parents insisted that I had to get an education, and once I said goodbye to Bob, I set off on a helicopter ride. It was scary to fly for the first time, but it was even scarier after landing when I realized I wouldn't come back for 9 whole months. Being at boarding school was unbearable because of the teachers' bad attitudes and the mean students. Soon, I was expelled and managed to go back to the chum. It turned out that during this time, Bob had lost a lot of weight. He refused to eat and lay in the same spot all day. But when he saw me, he livened up again, and we went fishing together. Or rather, Bob went fishing, and he also ate all the fish. I just watched, but the activity still made me pretty happy. Still, the question of my education remained open, and my parents decided to organize a school for nomads. They teamed up with a couple of other nomadic families and invited several teachers. At first, Bob scared my new classmates and teachers. One of the teachers refused to coexist with a dangerous predator, but the others gave him a chance and weren't disappointed. Bob loved people and had a lot of fun with his new friends. When all the children sat down to study, he followed, only there wasn't enough room in the tent for an adult bear, so he had to wait at the entrance. When we came back from class, we didn't see Bob. He was nowhere to be found, and we began to worry. We wanted to go looking for him, but my parents stopped us because it was too dangerous. A few days later, he returned with a frightened man. He told us that his name was James and that he went on a journey. He wanted to come talk to us, but suddenly he ran into a bear. He started to run away, and since my Bob loved playing tag, he chased after him. He could easily overtake a person, but he always held back just like he did this time. James was exhausted and ready to die, but Bob just sniffed and licked him. Then James tried to leave, but Bob followed him everywhere and seemed to be asking for something. After a couple of days of wandering, James realized that Bob simply didn't know the way back and took him back to us. He also said that he had lost all his belongings and asked permission to stay with us for some time. We gladly took him in, and somehow it turned out that he stayed for a long time. James didn't understand the rules of survival in the tundra at all, but he willingly learned everything. He took literally any job, and therefore everyone fell in love with him and quickly became attached to him. James knew many interesting stories and was happy to tell them to us. This diluted our gray, monotonous, everyday life, and my dad started calling James a brother. I never thought before that a stranger could become so close to us. However, a few months later, we were in for a tremendous shock. A police helicopter flew to us, and we learned that James was actually named Charles and that he escaped from prison where he was serving a sentence for bank robbery. They took him away, and we experienced a real shock. We trusted him so much and never even thought that he could be a criminal. On that day, I realized that we need to be careful around strangers because we're in the tundra. We're cut off from the whole world. There's no one here to help us. After James's arrest, it took us some time to recover from the shock and return to normal life. Still, I started reading a lot of psychology books to start understanding people better. There are big problems with communication in the tundra, so it's difficult for us to distinguish a good person from a bad one. I started reading about people's behavioral characteristics, body language, and physiognomy. In my opinion, having studied a ton of thematic literature, I could even work as a psychologist. This is the tundra, and here every inhabitant is universal in his abilities. We have to start mastering different professions from childhood. One day, Bob and I went for a walk and, as usual, started playing around and frolicking. Then, at some point, another bear showed up. It was clear from his appearance that he was very aggressive, not towards Bob, but towards me. And then I was seized by real horror. An enraged beast, an affectionate tame Bob, and me? In the tundra? What could be worse? I was bracing myself for the worst and wasn't at all hoping for salvation, but suddenly something incredible happened. Bob got up on his hind legs and growled. It was the first time I saw him like that, and I confess I was even more frightened. I am ashamed to say it, but I doubted him for a moment. I thought he might be taking the other bear's side, but I very quickly changed my mind because Bob pounced on his relative, protecting me. They got into a fight, and unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing I could do to help my best friend. It was a battle between two animals. I could only watch and pray that Bob would be okay. After 10 or 15 minutes, the fight was over. The second bear, limping, began to run away, and the wounded Bob lay on the ground in a pool of his own blood. I immediately rushed to him and realized that he needed urgent help, so I told him that everything would be fine and ran to the chum to call my parents for help. With great difficulty, the adults managed to carry Bob over so that Dad could examine him. His verdict was disappointing. He said that the bear needed an operation right away, and since we had no doctors or veterinarians, Dad had to be the doctor. It may seem strange to you that a reindeer herder can operate, but this is the tundra. Here, everyone has to master several professions, including complex ones like medicine. And in that moment, I realized it was my turn to study medicine. Dad said I needed to change into clean clothes, wash my hands, and come help him operate on Bob. I knew that sooner or later something like this would have happened anyway, so I couldn't refuse. Besides, it was about saving my best friend's life. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than I ever imagined. Bob kept going in and out of consciousness, he lost a lot of blood, and time passed incredibly slowly. I had never experienced such fatigue before, but I had to stay as focused as possible because the slightest moment of weakness could be fatal for Bob. The operation lasted 6 hours, and when it was all over, my dad and I just fell exhausted right on the floor to rest. Dad said that all the worst was behind us and that we saved our bear. I was happy, but there were still several months of caring for the animal ahead of us because he would need time to recover. Every day I took care of him, making special food for him to help strengthen his weakened body. Bob looked at me with gratitude and sometimes cried, apparently from the joy that he still had me, and I never got tired of thanking him for his courage and saving my life. A lot of time has passed since that day, and from time to time I have to operate on animals and even people with my dad. I began to understand anatomy and zoology, and now my parents say that I have a gift. The gift of healing, and so they insist that I go to the city for a while to get an education there and become a doctor. I'm not sure if that's what I want because I like living in the tundra, and I'm not ready to be away from Bob, who saved my life at the cost of his own health. I don't know what to do. Would you, in my place, go to the city to study? I'll read your answers in the comments. And if you liked my story, then be sure to press the like button and check if you're subscribed to our channel.